Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Education, the most studious committee in the Nevada State Legislature. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Assembly members De Silva, Dahlia, DeLong, Flanagan, Hanson, Hardy, Hunt, Koenig, LaRue Hatch, Mosca, Orent-Licker, and Chair Torres Fawcett.
Thank you. Before we get into our very full day of presentations, I just have a couple housekeeping reminders, but then also some information for people that maybe are not used to testifying in our building. Please remember to silence all electronic devices, including your cell phones and laptops. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to the committee secretary. For those joining online, please be sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking to minimize any background noise. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and spell your name for the secretaries. And please state your affiliation, if any, for the record. Then turn your microphone off each time you are done speaking, especially between cities as we go back and forth. Sometimes it becomes hard for us to hear if the mic stays on. Please make sure all handouts have been provided to our committee staff. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we do not agree with another person's position. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents. Please do not view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting. Each person will be limited to 2 minutes. In addition, the public may submit written testimony to the committee up to 24 hours after the hearing. As a note, because I know several people have reached out to me about public comment today, public comment will be taking place at the end. As I previously stated, I do expect it to be a pretty long day of presentations. So please note that if you're here for public comment, please just hold in there, hang in there, and we'll be ready for you as soon as our presentations are over. At this time, we'll go ahead and move on to the presentations. So I'll go ahead and invite our first presenter, which is Guy Hobbs from the Commission on School Funding. I believe you're present with us in Las Vegas, so please feel free to begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Guy Hobbs, H-O-B-B-S, and I'm here representing the Commission on School Funding. And we do have a presentation for you to give you an overview of the Commission's activities over this past interim. A couple of comments before we get into that. We did file a report this past November, which we were required to do by virtue of the mandate that we were given, and that report is in excess of 500 pages. We also filed an executive summary of that report, and I'll be touching on some key areas of that report today, and I'm certainly happy to be here and to do that. But to give you a little bit of an orientation as to what the Commission, well, how we came to be and what our tasks were over the past couple of years. We have a slide presentation. I don't know if that's up and available to you at this point. Megan Peterson with NDE, I believe, should be there.
Yeah, she's here. Thank you.
Okay, we can go to the next slide, Megan. And just to remind everyone, the Commission on School Funding came into being following the 2019 session, the passage of Senate Bill 543, which was the bill that put into place the pupil-centered funding plan, also created the Commission on School Funding, and gave it a number of assignments. The key assignments that were given to the Commission on School Funding were the monitoring and implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan, which remains one of our key responsibilities to this day, and also identification of optimal funding for education and identification of methods that could be used to fund optimal funding over the ensuing 10-year period. And then, of course, following in 2021, the passage of AB 495 tasked the Commission with completing additional reports and making additional findings and recommendations regarding sources of revenue to fund optimal funding. And more recently in 2023, AB 400 and SB 98 were passed by the legislature. Those contained a number of different tasks for us, still including the monitoring of pupil-centered funding plan and identification of optimal funding on a going forward basis, but also probably a couple of dozen of other assignments within the area of improvement of education funding. So some of the key deliverables on the next slide, I've talked about some of these. Identify a 10-year plan to achieve optimal funding, review and recommend improvements to the cost adjustment factors for the school districts, generally reviewing laws and regulations related to education and making recommendations accordingly. And again, the monitoring and improvements, monitoring the performance of the pupil-centered funding plan and making recommendations regarding improvements that could be made to the operation of that plan. Key tasks for us. And we're going to talk about some of those, but I think it's important to mention some of the other tasks we were given as well. One of those, in fact, if you go to the report and the table of contents in the report, if you click on any of the major headings in the table of contents, it'll take you right to that section of the report. We were also asked to look at things like teacher retention, compensation related issues. We were asked to look at critical capital funding issues that affect in particular, the rural school districts. And that's something I may have an opportunity to talk about a little bit later on in this presentation, but it was a wide array of topics. And I'll touch on just a few of those today as an introduction to what it is we did. The first one being optimal funding, the next slide. And we'll talk about some numbers in a moment because I think those are of incredible importance. One of the things that became very apparent to us as we were working through this is that in order to fund numbers, again, that we'll talk about in a moment, it was going to take consequential revenue sources to be able to do that. Now, one of the things that the commission did fairly early on was looked at the attributes of different revenues that could be made available over time to help fund and achieve optimal funding. And one of the key items, one of the key attributes that was identified was predictability and stability. Now, of course, I think we would all agree that if it's something as important as education, we want the revenue sources that are supporting that to be predictable and reliable and stable and all of those sorts of things over time. So there isn't a lot of volatility in the funding of education. And, you know, we also looked at the way that education has historically and traditionally been funded in Nevada and the way that education is traditionally funded in other states. So we took a very broad view of this. And one of the things that became very apparent to us is that there's a need to consider modernizing the Nevada tax structure in general. I would be saying this even if we weren't specifically talking about education, because it's something that I've worked with for over 40 years here in Nevada, is the fiscal structure of the state and local governments. And in particular, we made note of the sales tax system in the state and the property tax system in the state. And these two come to the forefront, not because they're a lot of fun to deal with. We don't look at these things lightly. And we understand when we're talking about major elements of fiscal policy that these are very important issues to all of us. But it's kind of unavoidable to have a conversation about them because sales tax and property tax have been key sources of funding for education for as long as I can remember, and years well in advance of anything I can remember. If you think about it on the sales tax side, there's the local school support tax piece. That's integral to funding education statewide. And on the property tax side, the 75-cent levy that's common to all of the school districts around the state is also integral to the funding. Over the years, a number of other revenue sources have been added, but the key foundational elements of funding for education in the state of Nevada still remain sales tax and property tax. So looking at those with a critical eye in terms of ways that those systems can be made to be more responsive to changes in our economy and changes that are reflective of the needs that we have in the state is something that we would strongly encourage. And you see some examples here, expanding the transaction base for excise taxes. Again, that's other speak for sales tax. We have a very narrow sales tax base in the state of Nevada that actually gets a bit narrower over time. And with the passage of the property tax abatement several years ago, we basically put handcuffs on the property tax system that I think need another look, particularly as our needs change over time. So that's why you see some of the things listed that you do on this particular slide. Now, getting to some of the numbers, we can go to the next slide. Now, the upper part of this, this bar graph that you see, the top half are estimates from, values from 2022. When we looked at Nevada's per pupil spending in 2022, it was $11,228. We compared that to the national average, which, as you can see, was $15,591. Now, we gave it a bit of thought that just being at the national average might be a meaningful thing, but we wanted to have it be a bit more substantive than just being at the national average. And so we also had our subject matter experts, APA, which has done a lot of work for the state over the years in the realm of education, look at what the particulars are in Nevada and make a recommendation as to what per pupil funding should be to achieve the educational objectives in the state. And you can see that they came up with a number of 15,718, which is fairly close to the national average. And the fact that that number was so close to the national average gave us a bit more confidence that the national average was a good proxy in the near term for optimal funding. Now, of course, average doesn't mean optimal, and we fully understand that. But getting to that particular point, since it's also in alignment with the subject matter experts' recommendation, would certainly get us closer to that point. So those were the numbers in 2022. The bottom half of this chart are the numbers in 2025 updated, and you can see that including the legislatively approved appropriations made during the last biennium, the per pupil spending in Nevada has risen by more than $2,000 per student, which is certainly a giant step in the right direction, to a $13,368 per pupil level. But as you can see, the national average and the subject matter expert recommendations have also moved upward. We expected to see this, particularly coming out of COVID, that a lot of states would be in the same position that Nevada was in, where they had some additional funding available to apply, and education being the priority that it is. It looks like other states generally did what Nevada did. So our gap between current per pupil funding and the objective level of per pupil funding remains roughly the same as it did previously. Going to the next slide. This takes the bar graphs and quantifies it a bit. So if you look at that delta, that difference between the national average per pupil funding and what we're currently funding in the state of Nevada, and multiplied it by enrollment, that's how you get the numbers that you see on this particular slide. And what you see in the middle column, that's titled incremental shortfall. The best way I could describe that is as the additional amount of funding that would be needed each of those years to achieve the national average by the 10th year. So in fiscal 2030, for example, an additional appropriation of $240 million that year, the following year, an additional appropriation of $250 million. If you followed the incremental shortfall values that you see here and appropriated accordingly by the 10th year, you would have funded to the national average. What you see on the right side is the aggregate shortfall. So by the 10th year, that gets you to roughly 2.5 billion in additional funding. So the additive total of those incremental shortfalls in the middle column would equal the number that you see on the bottom right side. But this gives you a little bit more of a sense of the order of magnitude of the funding that would be required over a 10-year period to achieve funding that would compare favorably with the national average. As I mentioned at the outset, in addition to quantifying optimal funding and identifying different things that could be used to achieve optimal funding, we are also asked to look at, next slide, Megan, cost adjustment factors. We were specifically asked to look at these, one of those being the Nevada Cost of Education Index, and the other being the attendance area adjustment. And in both cases, the Commission on School Funding did make recommendations. As you could see with the Nevada Cost of Education Index, we left that at an identity level of 1, which is an indication that we feel this requires further study. On one hand, we believe that there's absolute merit to continuing to work toward having a viable Nevada Cost of Education Index, but additional work still needs to be done on that, which is why it remains at 1.0 at this point. And with respect to attendance area adjustments, you can see some of the recommendations that were made with regard to parameters for attendance area adjustments. The next area, and next slide, and I'm trying to think of the best way to explain everything that has to do with reporting, because one of the more daunting tasks we were given, and this is generalizing quite a bit, was to help develop a way of reporting in the future that would enable you all as legislators to look at the consequences of the investments that you've made. And when I use the term consequences, I mean that in a positive way. You all would want to see changes in performance by virtue of the additional funds that are invested in education. And data becomes a huge part of developing such a reporting system. And so, excuse me. So we looked very closely at all of the different reports that are being generated today. And we were somewhat surprised to find out that there's something in excess of 500 different reports being generated and filed by our schools and school districts and our state. What's important, well, all of those reports had a reason for existing, but what was important to us is what data do all of these reports contain, and how do we access that data? How do we extract the more salient data from that, the more meaningful data? How do we assemble that into a new reporting framework that would give you all an indication of changes that are occurring because of additional investments that you would be making? And the recommendations that you see on this page are all hand in glove with the explanation that I just provided to you. We did find that some of the reporting is a bit outdated or unused, and consequently, if any of those reports that are not necessarily bringing value can be eliminated, it certainly would relieve a bit of staff time at different levels throughout the system. We also noted that some of the reports are filed on an annual basis, some on a semi-annual basis, some on a quarterly basis, and consequently the information recency or currency is not the same between all of those reports, which makes it hard to blend them together. And so we were recommending that some of the timing on that be brought into line, and that some of the existing reports could be consolidated without actually losing any of the meaning of the data that they provide. And ultimately, in putting together a report for evaluating changes in performance or student success over time would likely require that some of these reports be consolidated to provide you with what we think it is you're looking for from us. And lastly, because there's so much information flowing around out there in a lot of different directions, consolidating a lot of that, centralizing and consolidating a lot of that data at the state level seems to make sense to us, and accordingly we made recommendations along those lines. And NDE would be tasked with the additional responsibility of receiving and cataloging and inventorying all of that data, which we think is essential for the type of reporting that we hope to be able to recommend in coming sessions of the Commission on School Funding. Next slide, Megan. And of course, the pupil-centered funding plan itself, we have that ongoing responsibility to monitor the performance of the pupil-centered funding plan and make recommendations where necessary. And I can tell you this, and I think this is an important and hopefully reassuring observation, that the pupil-centered funding plan is working well, and it's working as it was designed to work. That doesn't mean that there won't need to be subtle changes to it over time because conditions change, but up to this point, the pupil-centered funding plan is working quite well. And on an ongoing basis, these are noted as next steps. We need to continue to do that and continue to ensure that the funds are being distributed in accordance with the plan. We know that we need to continue to evaluate the weights that are being applied and determine whether or not they're best applied against the adjusted base or the statewide overall base. We also need to review the multipliers for the weighted funding categories on an ongoing basis. I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion as the weeks proceed into your legislative session about one or more of those weights. But that's something that needs to be continually reevaluated, and particularly as more funding becomes available, we could do more with respect to fully funding the weights as we're currently doing at their current levels, while also appropriately funding the base per student funding on a statewide basis. And what I've tried to do up to this point is condense a 500 plus page report into about 15 or 20 minutes of explanation to you all. There are any one of the areas in this report that I'm sure we could spend a full day talking about, but I think for purposes of this meeting, and Madam Chair, you can correct me if I'm wrong, what we were asked to do is provide an overview and then get subsequent direction from you all. So with that, if there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. We really do appreciate the presentation, Chair Hobbs. And, I know probably for my newer education members and returning ones, this is probably the number one conversation that we're having with both constituents and stakeholders. So I think it was a really helpful overview. And I really do appreciate the executive summary for those of us that don't have the time to read the 500 plus page document that I started diving into in the last couple of weeks. I think the executive summary is a really helpful overview for our committee and for members of the public as well. Members, any questions? Okay, I will go ahead and begin with Vice Chair De Silva.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again, Mr. Hobbs. Always good seeing you, and thank you for your very vigorous presentation there. I have a quick question about the weights. I know that it was discussed here about evaluating some of the weights, and I had a particular question about some of the at-risk funding. I know that when you look at the sort of ways that we fund or are supposed to fund the at-risk our students and the weights that are appropriated along those lines, it can be very Byzantine. I was wondering if there's any sort of proposals that the Commission has made in addressing this issue. Thank you.
Certainly, again, Guy Hobbs, Commission on School Funding. I imagine this is one of those topics where we could spend a whole afternoon, talking about it, but I'll give you an overview of how the Commission has approached this over the last few years. Clearly, the legislature some number of years ago, and I can't recall the exact session, made a decision to use free and reduced lunch as a proxy for qualifying as at risk. I think everyone at the time knew, I believe they did, that was a very, very broad net to cast. And it was really a single metric that was being used to define what students might be at risk. So when we began the process of trying to evaluate this, one of the things I wanted to hone in on was exactly what does at risk mean? And in looking into it, because it has a certain connotation to it that I think we're all very, very sensitive to. And in looking into it, the definition was really at risk of not graduating. And that was it. And so then to be using a single metric to determine whether or not a student may be at risk of not graduating, seemed to fall short of all of the types of things that I think we all know can affect a student's propensity to graduate. And over the last couple of years, and actually preceding that, but for the last couple of years, what has been being used is the grad score, which is a collection of, if I recall, 70 or 71 different metrics that are weighted differently. This is an algorithm that by its design is intended to actually identify those students that would be more at risk of not graduating using multiple metrics to try to get to that. The arguments that have come up about the use of the grad score is that it's, relatively new, it's relatively untested. There are arguments that are made that it's not used in a lot of other places or a few other places for allocation of funding, those sorts of things. And I believe the position of the commission, and it was a unanimous vote by the commission, so I think I'm fair in saying this, was to continue to use the grad score. The grad score, the composition of metrics, we know over time will change. That's one of the discussions we had with the actual vendor. And the recommendation was continue to use the grad score, but monitor it very closely to ensure that it is actually doing what it is intended to do. So it wasn't blindly saying, let's just defer to that and walk away and not worry about it. I think we're all equally concerned that we appropriately provide funding to help mitigate any of the circumstances that may be preventing any of the students who are at risk of graduating, mitigating any of the issues that could prevent them from graduating. I think we all share that objective. So the recommendation, again, from the commission was to continue on with full monitoring. And hopefully that addresses your question. And I know that this is something where there will be some additional discussion because there are a lot of sensitivities around. Oh, by the way, one of the other things that the commission recommended was the terminology and the use of the term at risk seems to be somewhat stigmatizing on its own. We all have a visceral reaction when we hear the term at risk. And as a consequence, we recommended, and I'm sure it's going to escape me at the moment, but we recommended a change in terminology from at risk to something like student success or ensuring student success, something along those lines, because that's certainly more in line with what it's intended to do and far less stigmatizing than the term at risk.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Go ahead, Assemblyman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I had a question. So when it comes to the tracking the success then of these students, and then also allocating funds towards those students, is there a live way of actually doing that where we can actually see the achievement rates, identify an at-risk student, again with the very sort of Byzantine sort of definition that we have over there, and then work in a live manner in regards to sending those funds to those schools and to those students who need the help? Thank you.
Assemblyman, again, Guy Hobbs, I really appreciate that question because I think you just did a very good job of articulating what our goal is. We're trying to develop, again, there's a lot of reports out there that you could pull things from and say, okay, we're doing a little bit better in this, and then go to this report and say, oh, we're doing a little bit better in this. Maybe we need to do more in this particular area. We want to bring that all together so you have that in front of you. and are able to make those types of assessments. Now, realistically, I think most of us understand that an investment made today, your ability to measure the outcomes from making an investment today is probably 2 or 3 years down the line before you would actually see, statistically viable changes in performance. That I think could frustrate a lot of us because you would like to see things that are much more quickly measured than that. But that seems to be the reality that, you make an investment today, you make a change programmatically, and then you have to measure it after the fact to determine whether or not it was successful. So there will always be a lag of 2 or 3 years. But the important thing is that there is a performance reporting framework in place that at least allows all of you to assess that.
Thank you. Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hobbs. So great to see you, and I appreciate that a couple months ago we had a long conversation to understand all of the recommendations, and I think one thing that really stood out to me was around on slide 4, our modernization of the Nevada tax system, and I would just love if you could say more about the property taxes, because I feel like when you explained it in layman's terms, really, that I understood it more, and would love if you could share that a little on the record, please.
I will try. And I'll, again, Guy Hobbs, I'll try to be as concise as possible. We have a couple of issues with the current property tax structure. Now, I suppose, and looking at all of you, I'm 100% confident of what I'm about to say. I was around, my first session dealing with taxation matters with the Nevada State Legislature was 1981, probably before some of you were born. And I don't know that I'm proud of that, but it does give me a unique perspective. I was around for the tax shift, and I was around for all of the subsequent sessions that tinkered with what was done in 1981, which was to reduce the combined property tax rates that are allowable in any part of the state to a maximum of $3.64 per $100 of assessed valuation. It's now $3.66. And that 2 cents going from $3.64 to $3.66 is all the movement that we've had since 1981. The constitutional limit is $5 per $100 of assessed value. So the $3.66 is statutory. Now, the importance of that is, and I don't have the exact number in front of me, but memory tells me that roughly 11 or so of our counties, and consequently our county school districts in the state of Nevada, are at the 366 cap. So even if there were a desire on the part of the electorate, pick any unnamed county or school district at this point, to fund additional programs or capital with additional property tax revenues, the 366 cap would make it very, impossible to do that, right? Even if the will existed to do it. So that's one of the problems. That combined cap keeps any of those entities from using property tax to address any of its needs. And again, very little change in now, 44 years? The other issue is and I understand how sensitive these things are when I bring them up. Again, we don't take these matters lightly, but with the introduction of the property tax abatements some number of years ago, and the abatements essentially restrict the growth in a property tax bill for a residential property taxpayer to no more than 3% a year, and for non-residential 8% a year. And again, that sounds very good from a taxpayer perspective. But it has had some unintended consequences, I believe, on the funding side. Today, if you took all of the abated tax, and let me define abated tax. If you took the assessed valuation of property, which is the basis for taxing the property, and multiplied it by the tax rate, that would equal the taxes as assessed. Then you apply the abatements, and the abatements reduce that. So the current amount of accrued abatement in the state of Nevada is probably somewhere between, and I should know this number, but it's somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 billion dollars in abated tax, which is compared to some of the numbers I showed you earlier, a rather large number. And again, doing something with abatements, we understand the sensitivity there. The abatements will only grow over time. So the commission looked at phasing out abatements, freezing abatements, eliminating abatements, and then you have depreciation on top of abatements, which is its own matter. And you can't do anything to deal with the depreciation issue, which has been a subject of a discussion in the legislative, in various legislative sessions for many, many years. Because of the abatements, you can't fix the depreciation problem. So the abatements are something that need to be looked at, and you all would need to weigh the value of having the abatements versus the cost of having the abatements.
Follow-up, Chair. And thank you so much. I know that that's a lot, but I think it's really important to put on the record, and I really appreciate it. And my follow-up to that is has the executive branch said anything about how they would like to increase funding for schools, in your knowledge?
As a member of the Commission on School Funding, I don't have direct interaction with the executive branch. I would look, the report that we have filed, the recommendations are clear, and I know that it was delivered to Legislative Council Bureau as well as to the governor's office. But I haven't had any direct conversations with the governor or the governor's staff about that matter.
Thank you. And I have one more. Thank you, Chair. And it could be a quick one. I just didn't see anything about the small, and I could have missed it, the small school recommendation. I know in at least White Pine, we have a school that's over 100 years old. Can you just talk about what recommendation was put in for that?
Yes, and I'll try to be as concise as possible. And apparently I'm not doing a very good job at that, but I'll try.
I don't know how you read our minds. Thank you.
I am so sorry. Again, that's why it ended up being 500 plus pages. But one of the chapters in the final report has to do with the funding of capital for smaller districts. I've described to you some of the problems regarding the ability of the districts to use property taxes to fund capital improvements, which is the common way of doing it. And so we made a recommendation that funds be appropriated, and there's nuances to this too that I won't go into now, but to the state infrastructure bank, where the school districts could make application to the state infrastructure bank. And then based on relative need, the state infrastructure bank can extend loans to help those school districts do something that they can't necessarily do on their own. That's about as concise as I can make that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hobbs, and thank you so much for your remarks. I mean, I think you have such a wealth of knowledge, and I know it's hard for you to shorten those statements, but we really do appreciate it. We appreciate the information too, and you are trying to give us quick snippets of a 500+ page document. So we really do appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. Next, I'll go to Assembly Member Dahlia, and then I'll go to Assembly Member LaRue Hatchafter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Hobbs, for your presentation. I've got hopefully a quick one. Could you tell us at a high level some of the challenges you've identified with state reporting and what we can do as the legislature and what the Department of Education can do to address those?
Well, one of the things that we noticed is that oftentimes accompanying any programmatic funding changes over the many, many years to education, that's generally accompanied by yet another series of required reports. And oftentimes the new series of required reports are already being dealt with by older reports that were previously required. So, I understand the need for the desire and the need for additional reporting. But I think you all would probably share with us the desire to see what the entire inventory of reporting is, the data that it contains, and look for opportunities to try to consolidate and compress that.
Thank you. Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation. I am still reeling from that number about the abatements. 1.5 to 1.8 billion seems an incredible amount of money that we could be applying to our schools. So thank you for that number. My question actually is a follow-up to my colleagues about the reporting. Looking at those number of reports, 500 plus reports, and some of them are new, like acing accountability, and these other ones we've just implemented. What has the response been from NDE and from the governor's office to your recommendation to streamline those into one? Are we hopefully going to see some legislation this session to get rid of some of those duplicative reports?
Again, Guy Hobbs, and to the latter part of your question, I really, really hope so, that we will see that. We have worked very closely with NDE, and I think NDE shares a lot of the same viewpoints as the commission shares with respect to the reporting. Look, at the end of the day, the reports that should be taking up time to file should be those that have a true meaning that could impact decision making somewhere, right, and provide for additional accountability. I think we would all agree with that statement. And I'm not sure all of those reports are making it to a point where they necessarily matter. That's something that we're still looking into. I know that you as legislators would be not very happy if you were receiving all 500 of those reports, right, on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, although you'd be happy to be aware of the data that's contained within them. And I think that's where we're trying to go at this point is, there's a lot of data out there. We're not sure if it's all being used to its highest and best use. And how could we corral that information and turn it into a performance report that would answer the types of questions I know all of you have?
Thank you so much. Chair, may I have a second question? Thank you. My second question is about our at-risk discussion, following up on some of my colleagues. There have been a lot of very concerning articles about the use of AI to determine funding, and we are the only state in the nation that is using Infinite Campus AI. And, you know, as a teacher that uses Infinite Campus every single day, it is concerning to me that how I put in that data versus how other teachers put in that data across the state is now having implications on funding. And so I just wondered if you could walk us through some of those concerns and how we are addressing that use of AI in determining what our kids are getting to support their learning.
Well, some of this may be better addressed in your next presentation by NDE, because we as the commission really aren't the ones that are, you know, using the funding that is applied to what's currently called at risk from a programmatic perspective. So that part is very difficult for me to speak to. You know, I think you're dealing with largely a philosophical question. We know that free and reduced lunch cast too broad a net and was too narrow in terms of its approach to identifying the students that we're trying to reach. What is the next best thing to doing that? I've heard discussion about using something called direct certification, which is kind of along the same lines. It's a far more narrow set of metrics. And again, when you think about what those metrics are supposed to produce, it's supposed to produce an early warning system for you to identify those kids who are most at risk of not graduating. Does direct certification do that? I would doubt that that's the case. And so you have the opportunity with this algorithm, which, you know, I guess could be classified as artificial intelligence, to make such an identification. And being someone who's used to doing mathematical modeling, it doesn't surprise me that there would be an algorithm that could be predictive.
IT, I think there might be, I don't know if the mic is off, but we cannot hear you at this time, Mr. Hobbs. One minute recess. we're just testing up here. If you hear us in Las Vegas, can you just do a test on the mic, please, Mr. Hobbs?
Test, test.
It looks like we're back and running. The Assembly Committee on Education, the most studious committee, will return. At this time, I do believe that Assembly Member LaRue Hatch was able to get her response. We were able to read the captions. I don't know if there's any additional information that you wanted to provide, Mr. Hobbs, before you cut off.
Again, Guy Hobbs, as long as she feels that she has a response and if there's any other information needed, I'm pretty easy to find.
Thank you. I'm sure we will be reaching out. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we see you during the legislative cycle. I also had the opportunity to speak to Superintendent Ebert, who mentioned that Senate Bill 81 does have to do with some of those reporting as well. It might be a good point of reference for members of this committee as well, although it begins in the other house. So obviously it'll take a while before it gets to this side, if it gets to this side. Members, are there any remaining questions? Assemblymember Ortlicker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this presentation. I'm curious, you had the slide about funding level comparison, and it was great to be reminded of how much we've increased funding, but it was disappointing to see we haven't narrowed the gap very much. Were other states doing exactly what we were doing because of the learning gaps from COVID, because of the special federal funding? Do you have an answer for that?
Again, Guy Hobbs, that was something that was really interesting to us when we got the new data a few months ago. And what I believe to be the case, and this is maybe more opinion than anything else, is that most of the other states were in the same situation that Nevada was in. And I think it was more a function of additional federal funding that had become available subsequent to COVID. And many of the states made the same decision that Nevada made and invested much of that into the education side. And I think that's what, that's what perpetuated the same level of gap, although, that increase of more than $2,000 per pupil was something that was extraordinarily welcome in Nevada. But I think the entire post-COVID situation distorted some of the values.
Thank you. I don't believe any members here have any additional questions. So thank you, Mr. Hobbs, for being present. We appreciate your presentation. And I'm sure some of us will be reaching out as we continue to look at policy for this upcoming cycle. I know we have at least one committee bill on reporting. I know there's several other bills that'll have to kind of touch some of the things from the commission. So we'll use you as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
At this time, we'll go ahead and begin our next presentation with State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Joan Ebert, regarding the state of public education. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Torres Fawcett, Vice Chair De Silva, members of the studious committee. For the record, my name is Joan Ebert. I'm honored to serve as the State Superintendent of Public Instruction in the great state of Nevada. To my right, we have Deputy McGill, and to my left, we have Deputy Dixon. I'm sorry, I just have to say it. They're in great rebel red today, even though they are both UNR graduates.
It looks like this presentation is over.
Let's get this going. So with that, And then you also met our illustrious Deputy Peterson. The conversation before, all of us, and we know that we stand in the crossroads of education. While the world around us is transforming at an unprecedented pace, our education system often feels stuck in the past. We're preparing students for a future we can barely imagine using methods that are increasingly outdated. This isn't a criticism of our dedicated educators, many of whom are doing extraordinary work within a system that needs fundamental change. It's a call to action, a recognition that we must adapt to survive and thrive in an innovative learning environment. On this deck we provided for you, it is showing, thank you. You can find this on our Nevada report card. It gives you the statistics across the state. For time's sake, I'm not going to go through that. But you will see that less than half of our students are proficient in math and English language arts. So how do we solve this problem? The answer lies in transforming how we educate. The good news is we have the tools and the framework to make a lasting change. By integrating personalized competency-based learning, utilizing multi-tier systems of support, ensuring accountability, and learning from what's already working, we can build an education system that meets the needs of every student. It's not just about giving students a diploma, it's about giving them the skills, the knowledge, and the confidence to thrive. As we move forward today, I hope we can all reflect on what we can do in our own sphere of influence to build an education system that's more than just pass or fail. It's about building a future where every student, no matter their background, has the opportunity to succeed. So let's dive in together. We know that we can turn the tide on this issue and ensure that education is the powerful tool that it's meant to be for our students and Nevada's economy. Today, I'm highlighting 4 key initiatives that we believe will help the entire state and the Nevada Department of Education to move into the future. First, personalized competency-based learning. Second, enhancing systems through MTSS. Third, strengthening accountability to ensure that every child is in a successful learning environment. And fourth, building on our achievements while addressing ongoing challenges. Personalized competency-based learning. We know that this content and what we've done as a state, that moving away from just memorizing facts being prioritized, we need to make sure that our students are critical thinkers, they're problem solvers, and that they have analytical skills. We need to foster curiosity, encouraging questioning, and empower students to become independent learners. The world needs innovators, creators, and problem solvers. And this is the vision for our Nevada Portrait of a Learner. This initiative cultivates key competencies, which include critical thinking, communication, adaptability, and social-emotional skills. They empower our students for success in our changing world. This collaborative framework was built by Nevadans for Nevadans, and that's our students, our parents, our community, legislators. We had over 100 business partners participate in building out the portrait. Multi-tier systems of support is our second initiative, and it improves how the state, districts, and schools will collaboratively work towards student outcomes. MTSS helps ensure the following key concepts. First, early intervention and cost savings. MTSS focuses on identifying and addressing academic and behavioral issues early. We know that when we focus on Tier 1 universal core instruction, that we have high-quality preventative instruction for all students, our schools can reduce the need for more expensive interventions which occur in Tier 2 and Tier 3. A proactive approach can result in long-term cost savings by minimizing the number of students who require extensive one-on-one support. Second, by doing so, we know that we'll improve all of our student outcomes and accountability. And then third, supporting all of our students equitably, meeting them where they're at. Our school districts that are involved in MTSS, we have UNR as our partner in doing this work. 85% of our school districts experience positive impact in the use of evidence-based practices to teach and support students. 95% of implementing districts reported significant impact with alignment of the strategies and interventions. And finally, across the board, when implemented with fidelity, we saw improved academic performance, enhanced social emotional growth, and positive behavioral changes. The third initiative is our accountability. We must be innovative in the way that our system works with accountability. First, to support student accountability. I already spoke to effective Tier 1 instruction. We know that our students can succeed not only when they have their standardized assessments, which we do need within our system, but also the formative assessments, which go deeper in measuring our students' critical thinking and analysis. These assessments provide feedback to both the students, teachers, and helping to refine our instruction and enhance learning. Second, for school accountability, the Nevada Report Card is our public reporting system that provides information about the state's public schools, and it's a tool to help ensure accountability and transparency in our system. It includes our school ratings, our student achievement, school discipline, attendance rate, school designation, and educator qualification. Third, for district and state accountability, we have ACING accountability, which holds our districts accountable to the impressive $2.6 billion that were made for our students and our school districts. ACING accountability aims in the framework to ensure that this historical increase is directly tied to student performance by answering these 6 key questions. The next slide presents proficiency for the last 8 years on the Smarter Balance Assessment for grades 3 through 8 in English Language Arts. And you can see that for the past school year, 23-24, the state proficiency rate saw a slight increase of 0.3 percentage points. For the 2019-2020 school year, that year was waived during the pandemic, and so that is why there's a gap on that slide. For mathematics, we have great improvement out of the pandemic. We're still not back to our pre-pandemic rates, but the last school year saw a 1.3 percentage point increase over the previous year. Our graduation rate is holding steady at 81.6%, and then on the next slide you can see our individual school districts' graduation rates. Proud to report that over 7 of our school districts have a graduation rate of over 90%. For the fourth point I'm highlighting today, it's our strategy of building on our strengths and following a few of our standouts. Academic proficiency. Nevada's 3rd through 8th grade students demonstrated measurable academic progress in the 23-24 school year via our Smarter Balance assessments. The mathematics proficiency, as you saw, for a 2nd consecutive year across all grade levels and across all student groups made gains, and we are very proud of all of that work that our teachers have been working with our students and our parents. For career and technical education, in 2020, our graduation rate for career and technical education was 93.2%. Last year, it increased to 96.9% for the graduating class of 2024. Chronic absenteeism. Nevada's chronic absenteeism rate improved significantly during the last school year, decreasing from 34.9% to 25.9%, which is a 9 percentage point improvement. For our early childhood programs, Nevada expanded eligibility for the Nevada Ready State Pre-K. We were very excited to have that implementation last year. Thank you for allocating the $140 million over the biennium. We, for the first time as a state, were able to fund 3-year-olds for pre-K, and we expanded the seats for 4-year-olds as well. For teacher recruitment and retention, from 2019 to 2023, the instructional staff has increased 22%, and tuition reimbursements rose 122%. This reflects our targeted efforts to strengthen and expand the teacher workforce. Over the past year, the teacher attrition rate decreased from 12.5% to 8.7%, which is a 30% year-over-year improvement that underscores the progress that has been made in teacher retention efforts. Specifically, when you think about the almost 20% increase in pay, that you can attribute to, we have over 1,200 more teachers in our classrooms this year than we did last year. So wonderful gratitude for that, to make sure that we have highly effective educators in our classroom. School safety. Nevada's Safe Voice program, as you know, is an anonymous tip line designed to enhance our students' safety, health, and well-being. To date, the program has demonstrated measurable success in violence reduction, including a 32% decrease in violence against staff and weapon possession. For our last piece, I'm going to end the presentation with our opportunities and challenges. I spoke to our teacher recruitment and retention. I want to move now on to our rates of suspension and expulsion. We know that by suspending and expelling our children, it disrupts their learning, it lowers student engagement, and can lead to long-term academic setbacks, especially for marginalized groups who face these actions more at a higher rate than others. From the 2022 to the 2023 and 2024 school year, our data in Nevada revealed persistent disparities in suspension and expulsion rates among racial and ethnic groups. For our Black students, they faced disproportionately high rates of both suspensions and expulsions. And for our Hispanic students, they were overrepresented in expulsions. These patterns highlight the challenges in achieving equitable disciplinary practices and underscore the need for targeted interventions to address these disparities. For the Nevada Department of Education, I know you saw in the last presentation the staffing levels. We are 219 staff strong, small but mighty. We are currently working with a vendor to compare the Department of Education to other departments of education around the United States. What our vendor has told us so far is we're about half the size of other departments of education that provide the same services for about the same number of students. Chronic absenteeism, I shared that data. And then here too, just emphasizing the funding that has been made available. We're very grateful that the funding that was made available, but to see the visual and look at the gap, that to reach the national average, there still is a gap. In closing, I'd like to look towards the future of our state. We know that we need to continue to evolve for every learner. That competency-based is not just a new approach, but it's transformative, and as we shift towards that personalized student-centered education system that empowers every student to move at their own pace. In tandem with this shift, our multi-tier system of support ensures that no child is left behind, offering the right level of intervention and enrichment at the right time. Together with these systems, we know we can create a foundation of equity where every student has access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. However, these advancements are not without their challenges. We remain steadfast in our commitment to accountability, holding ourselves to high standards while ensuring that our efforts are consistently making a meaningful difference in student outcomes. Accountability is not about blame, but it's about shared responsibility to each and every one of our children. Regardless of their background, we need to make sure that every child has the opportunity to succeed. Lastly, we cannot overlook the critical role that funding plays in achieving these goals. Adequate, equitable funding is the backbone of every initiative and innovation that we need to make sure we thrive and strive for. We must continue to advocate for financial resources needed to make our vision for education a reality. Together with a clear commitment to competency-based learning, multi-tiered systems of support, accountability, and sustainable funding, we can create an education system where every student is equipped to succeed today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. We invite you to move together in a united purpose with an unwavering belief that every child can succeed to create a home, a life, and a future. Thank you, Madam Chair. We stand ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, members. Any questions? Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for being here today. So I have some questions about testing, because we know that's obviously always top of our list. I know Assemblymember DeLong's a little tall compared to me, but I'll scoot. So just a clarifying question for those folks that are not educators. Can you just tell us when the SBAC testing window is in Nevada?
The SBAC testing window opens in the 120th day of instruction, and that it is made available for school districts. They choose the time frame with the window to administer our federally required 3 through 8th grade English language arts and mathematics.
So that's probably what, like February, March-ish in the school year?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, yes.
Okay. And then, Chair, I'd like to follow up if I can. So I know that it is common practice in most other states to take those tests in April and May when the kids have had a full year of instruction. And I'm just wondering why our students are taking those tests so early in the year before they've gotten the full year of instruction, and if that is maybe reflected in some of our poor scores in compared to other states.
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, our state has moved the school start days earlier into August. We used to have our school start days after Labor Day. And so the 120 day instruction time, it appears that ours are earlier, but they actually align with the amount of instruction that the other states are providing. So for instance, in New York, it is against the law to start school before Labor Day. So that's a whole month. So we're doing ours in March. They would start in April.
Can I follow up, Chair? Is that an NRS that we have to do it so early, though? Is it possible for us as a state and NDE to make that decision to move it later, to give our kids a little bit more time to prepare?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, I believe it is in NRS or NAC. Off the top of my head, I would need to phone a friend. That being said, we also need to be cognizant, which we have been working with the superintendents as well. The vendor needs time to process that data. So the farther you push it back, then the farther it would take for us to result. So kind of holding those two concepts in our head at the same time. When do you want the results back and how far the test, those pieces. I am pleased to share with you that this school year, working with the school districts, the test itself will be shortened. And so we do expect those results back sooner.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question about that other test, but I can hold it for after other folks have gone if you would prefer.
Just go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chair. So actually, I was going to ask about that shorter test, and I think we all love the idea of reducing testing. Absolutely. I just wondered about the process. Was that new test approved by the State Board of Education, or was that a decision of your own or your own chiefs?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, we worked with our colleagues, our superintendents, we worked with community members, and it is within the purview of the Department of Education to make that decision.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll go now to, I'm just going to give the order so people know where in line of questioning they are. So I have Assemblymember Mosca, then Koenig, then Dahlia, and then Hansen. So go ahead, Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent, for this very helpful information. And my question is going to be around the Commission on Innovation and Education that myself, my colleague from the north up here in the second row, was also served on for the last year and a half, and Superintendent Young in the audience as well. So it has been a great venture in working on this from the bill from last session. And as someone who did work in the Clark County School District in 2011 on the school performance framework, we have have now been working on page 29 in the report on all this work on how we may change the accountability system, especially thinking about the portrait of a Nevada learner. And would just love if you could share more about that, because I think so many educators and folks out there are always interested in this topic. I think it'd be great to give an update. Thank you.
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, we are very thankful for the work of the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education. My colleagues, the superintendents, will be going deeper into the commission itself, but I would like to share that in the governor's recommended budget, we have requested funds to redo the school performance framework. And so, yes, I too was here in 2011 when we went around the entire state. It was a state initiative. It wasn't just the Department of Education that sat in the room and came up with a school performance framework. Every single county was involved, teachers were involved, administrators were involved, community was involved in building that framework. And so we would like to go through the same process. I hope that you all will be supportive in making that shift. We do still have to follow whatever federal guidelines are required, but we are in charge of being able to, we talk about chronic absenteeism quite a bit. That was Nevada making the decision that we wanted it in our accountability system. If we choose not to have it in the future, we can choose not to have it in the future.
Thank you so much, Chair. And so I just hope everyone watching today and then watches our YouTube knows that they can give their input and make sure that their thoughts are included in this new venture. Thank you.
That was a great plug for our YouTube channel. So I think we're YouTube famous now. And kind of building off of that, with that being said, in that conversation, what do you think are some of the challenges with the current school performance framework?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, a lot of conversation around chronic absenteeism. Also, too, there is a lot of conversation on how much we weight growth and how much we weight proficiency. Because there we want both of them. We want our students to be proficient, but we also want to recognize those students that have the steepest climb and are making the greatest growth. So those metrics are things that we continue to look at. Also, the third piece I would add is closing the gap between our various groups of students. There is a gap that must be closed, not incrementally, but making sure that we're quickly addressing the issues within those schools. And our district leaders are doing an amazing job in making sure that they are looking at their data and closing their gaps, and then that would be reflected in our accountability system.
Thank you. And I know I've looked at the state report card a couple of different times in the last couple of weeks, and I know we continue to see that our ELL students are significantly, our English language learners are significantly behind where our other scholars are. Additionally, we continue to see that African American students are significantly behind. So there's definitely some gaps that we need to address. With that being said, what if we already recognize that the school performance framework is not a just system, right? I think if that's a conversation that's being had, and if the legislature were to agree that this is not a just system, what'll be done? What are the penalties for schools that are not currently, like, are the 1-star, 2-star schools, either in school districts or in the charter authority, and why would there not be some type of hold harmless? If we're saying as a system that, the current reporting mechanism that we have is not sufficient, then what is going to be done to ensure that schools are not penalized for not achieving well with an unjust system?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, a couple of things. Number one, the system is designed for at the state level to be able to identify those schools that need the most assistance and then drive resources to those schools. So no one at this table or in the Department of Education looks at it as a punitive component. And again, we've had this conversation around, and I've had the conversation with parents. If you take Myrtle Tate, for example, those of you in the north, that school is in East Las Vegas, very high ELL population. If you were a newcomer to the United States, if I was a newcomer to the United States, I would want my child in that school. It is not rated a 5-star school. But because of the resources and what is made available, the language resources that the principal has made there, the teachers have been there year over year, all of the other components that are important for someone that is coming new to the country, I would want to make sure that they go to that school. And so the STAR system was built to look at those schools that need additional resources, not to be punitive. And how we decide as Nevadans that we want to use the data moving forward, we have, and I always say, if you could have what you want, what would you have? And so that's how we're going to move forward. Again, if the funding is authorized out of this session, to change the system.
Thank you. And I will say, I do think there is some history, though, of us punishing school leaders that have 1-star, 2-star schools. In my conversation with principals, with superintendents, I've definitely had a conversation about how they feel like they're unfairly penalized for not performing on the school performance framework, which I think is just not the best accountability system that we can use to measure schools. Additionally, charter schools are shut down if they're not achieving. So I think there is a history of it. So if this is the conversation that we're going to have, I think we do need to make sure that there are provisions in place to ensure that those leaders continue to, one, support their schools, right? We don't want to say that there's no accountability system, but that, we're looking for a new accountability system, and we're going to find other ways to support these schools and hold community leaders accountable. Thank you. We'll continue with our questioning. Sorry. Assemblymember Koenig.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. My question was already kind of asked. I was going to bring up the Commission for Innovation and Excellence in Education. We focus mostly on proficiency-based learning, and everything we've talked about today was talking about competency-based. So do you see a place for proficiency-based learning in the future here in the state?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, we want all of our students to be proficient at grade level. What has transpired over time, though, is that we have not given our educators the flexibility in understanding where each of our children are and to make sure that those resources are driven to the students. So the Tier 1 instruction is critical. We need to make sure that it is implemented effectively in all of our classrooms, and then again, providing our supports. Graduating on time with your peers, are important, but also too, making sure that students can either graduate early or a 5th-year graduation. Almost to the point that the chair was making, we need to take away the stigma that because our students maybe took an extra year to graduate, there are many reasons that may have transpired, but celebrating that they earned a diploma is more important. And so how we shape that narrative around our state, I think a lot of times in Nevada, we are not very positive and lift ourselves up. And I share that for those of you that don't know, I spent 4 years in New York. They lift their students up in the system every single day, no matter where all of their students are. And I think we have a different culture that we're trying to change with our communities, our schools, our students. Every single child brings their assets to school, and just some need additional resources or different resources than others. I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you.
Quick follow-up, or just a comment. I really think that proficiency-based is probably the way to go, but it's going to be a really, really heavy lift to get from where we are to where we need to be.
Thank you. Assemblymember Dahlia.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent Ebert, for being here. I have a quick question. I'm a technology attorney by trade, so I've got what might be a tech question that's a little bit in the weeds. But is there anything you could tell us today about how Infinite Campus calculates the grad score? Thank you.
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, you are lucky that I used to be the Chief Technology Officer of a school district. So with that, yes, it is machine learning. It is not AI. And so you get that. Yeah. It does take, it's used the data for the last 10 years of graduation, students that graduate with their cohort. And there are millions of students, not just the students in Nevada, but students across the United States. It comes within and colleagues correct me if I'm wrong, within 2% plus or minus of capturing all those students. What we've decided in Nevada is that for the funding, we would take the bottom quintile to fund. And so in our state, it would be almost 100,000 students. But because, and I can't remember which member brought it up earlier, 100,000 students are in the at-risk funding. And again, language matters. We do want to change that for student success funding instead of negative connotation. But it is about 60,000 students that receive the funds because the other 30,000 are either ELL students or special education students, which receive a higher weight of funding.
Any follow-ups, Assembly Member? No, not at this time. And just so you know, committee members, I had the pleasure of joining Superintendent Ebert and her team in a meeting with Infinite Campus. So we will have a presentation from Infinite Campus specifically to talk about this topic and some other reporting mechanisms and how we could use Infinite Campus here in the state of Nevada later on this session. Assembly Member Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I appreciate all the information and the work that you're doing. So there's a lot of terminology that we use. We talk about competency versus proficiency. I think most of the people in this room know that I tend to be the squeaky wheel, always asking about, hey, why are these graduation rates here and these proficiency rates are down here? And I know we all care and we're trying to solve that dilemma. One of the concerns I have over competency versus proficiency, competency is, definition is that a person's overall knowledge of skills and abilities, where proficiency is, a skill level in that specific area. And so for me, proficiency is so vitally important, and that the best way for us to lift kids up is to make sure that they can, at the bare minimum, graduate being able to read in a proficient manner, and to be able to do math in a proficient manner. So that being said, as we look at the Nevada report card, and I really appreciate this portal. It's really very easy, dial in, you can drill down. Here's where my question's gonna come in. When we look at the elementary, and we go elementary, middle, and high in English language arts, and then we do the same with math. We start pretty strong in the elementary school, middle school will drop, and then high school, except in English language arts. That's the interesting thing. Elementary starts in that 40, I'll round up, 43 percentile proficiency. Middle school drops down a little bit. We know middle schoolers are a different little animal. And then high school, actually it goes up. But in math, precipitously, we start in elementary, then we go from 38 to 26.8. By high school, they're down in 19.4% in math. I'm wondering, when we look at the data, what are we examining as what is happening there? Is it the curriculum? Is it the classroom environment? Is it the supports? And I'm just wondering, we're good at getting the data, and I'm not in the trenches per se. So once we have these numbers, which frankly are frightening, what is the analysis going on in those classrooms as far as why are we having this struggle? So I guess my question is, what is the investigative work that's being done so that we can know how do we fix what? What do we need to fix?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. For the record, Deputy Superintendent Amory Dixon. That is a wonderful question. We have really been having a conversation internally that we really do want to focus more on mathematics. We spent a lot of time looking at reading. We know we have a lot of different initiatives. We just have our literacy plan that will be rolling out here in the fall. And what we'd like to do as a department is really delve into what we see within mathematics. We're also looking at schools across the state that are showing positive outcomes in different areas. And so we do plan as a department to really look at schools that are performing well in mathematics, determining what the conditions are that are in place for that, and then making sure that we're able to support our educators, our administrators, our districts across the state to replicate those in some manner. So this is work that we are very excited about. Our superintendent, as we all know, is a great fan of mathematics. And so she was very excited when our teaching and learning team brought that idea, because we do absolutely agree with you. We need to spend more time focusing on that, and we look forward to partnering with our partners across the state in that work.
Thank you. Assemblymember Orlicker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'd appreciate a little more on chronic absenteeism. I was glad to hear that the rate has dropped, but seems quite high. So is that may be, we have a very generous definition of chronic absenteeism, but if you could tell me how we define it and why it's so high, because 26%, that seems surprising to me.
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, it is high. And the definition itself, we follow the federal definition, which is missing 10% or more of the learning time. And so 180 days, that would be that a student misses 18 days or more. This is 2 days a month. That is a lot of time for a child to miss. And we have, as Deputy Dixon mentioned, been doing a deeper dive into our data and the correlation when students miss school and their proficiency rate, as Assembly Member Hansen was just talking about. There is a correlation. If they are not in school, their proficiency, when it comes to measuring it, they are not performing. We actually have it broken down, which Chair will be more than happy to provide you that data and analysis. What I'm proud to say is that both in northern Nevada and in southern Nevada, we have several groups, and I have their name right here, who are working with us. In southern Nevada, it's the Southern Nevada Family Engage Center. And northern Nevada, we have the Washoe County School District has created a coalition with strengthening our community to reduce chronic absenteeism. So it's getting the entire community involved in making sure our children are in school. If they see a child that is, in the middle of the day somewhere, that people feel comfortable in saying, hey, aren't you supposed to be in school? Also, too, we've joined as a coalition with other states to reduce chronic absenteeism as well. So we're not the only state that is having this issue, especially coming out of the pandemic. But I will tell you, we are tackling it from many different aspects and bringing in the community, and would love to have you involved in that as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. If you could say more about the causes. Are these problems with the kid, with the family? Do you know why we've got 26% who are missing so much?
Yeah, each family is unique. There are many different places and information. I think our superintendents are probably better positioned to share with each of their communities. We have 17 school districts in the State Public Charter School Authority, and each community has their own variation of what is transpiring, and the superintendents are definitely positioned to answer that.
Thank you. Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a brief follow-up. So I'm also very concerned with chronic absenteeism, and I'm happy to see that there's been some improvement, but it is still a significant concern. And I just wanted to ask about your messaging around seat time. I've heard a lot of teachers say, it doesn't seem like we value students being in seats anymore. I used to have students that were absent because of real medical issues and things going on at home, and now I have students absent because they're going to Disneyland for a week, or they're going on a 2-week hunting trip. And when we have presentations here that say things like, we don't need to worry about satisfying seat time requirements, and we don't want to worry about these arbitrary metrics. I just wonder how your messaging and how you're maybe pulling back on attendance may be impacting that absenteeism.
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, thank you for that question. As we continue to make the shift with making sure that our students are proficient and competent in many different areas, change, people want to have it either or, and it is an and. As long as our students are making progress with their learning, having that, demonstrating their proficiency and having the time in the classroom is important, and making sure that they move at their pace. We are working with the Carnegie Foundation, who are the ones back in 1904 came up with the Carnegie unit and made the determination that 120 hours, then you must have been able, if you were exposed to 120 hours of seat time, then you must know the curriculum. All the brain research that we have over the last century has told us, no, it's not 120 hours. For myself, I may need 140 hours, but for you, you may only need 100 hours. And so as we make that shift, we are going to need to make sure that the messaging is about our students being proficient, being competent, demonstrating critical thinking skills. And as the technology moves on, we'll be able to have better reporting on each child's ability in each of those areas. We haven't been able to measure resilience, collaboration, communication, but those are all things that are coming forward as our ability to be able to not only measure of them, but to be able to report to our constituents at what level our students are at. So yes, it is not a perfect system at this moment in time, but we will continue on our messaging that we want all of our students to be productive citizens after they earn their diploma.
Thank you. And I know I have just a couple more questions, but I just want to remind members we have another presentation, and I have several members. Can you raise hands if you have a 4 p.m. committee? Okay, so I have a couple that might be dropping off, and I know some committees had to move because they're doing a joint committee. Some committees are meeting a little bit earlier than normal today. So if you see members that have to leave throughout, please know that they're not being rude, but they have other committee obligations that they are required to attend. So at this point, I will go ahead and go to Assemblymember Hansen.
Thank you, Chair, for that indulgence, and I'll make it quick. My thought was provoked by a comment from one of my colleagues. When we talk about absenteeism and the chronicness, do we parse out, are we able to, I'm assuming in that number, it's any kid that's over the 18 days, right? So, but there are kids, and I might know a few, that have missed to go to Disneyland, but they were a 4.0 student, or they were on the honor roll in elementary school. Can we see what numbers those are? Like, are there students that are high-performing students that maybe miss more than we would like? And it goes all back to, I know, is there money, they have to be in the seat, like, when they miss, then the school doesn't get the money. Or, I'm trying to understand, is it about the money? I know we care about them being absent, especially those kids that aren't the overperformer kids. Does that make sense?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, it absolutely does make sense. I'll take the funding piece first. Funding is based on enrollment, not on attendance. So the students that are enrolled, the funding comes through quarterly. For proficiency, first of all, I hope they're not going to Disneyland for 18 days out of the school year. That would be a lot. But yes, I mean, families, 10% is a lot. I mean, that's the thing that we need to recognize. I think I get a lot of comments sometimes from people, well, the family did go, but they did it for 1 week. They didn't do it for 18 days. And so we need to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples when we make these statements and when we look at the data. But yes, and usually those students that are missing, because of family vacation, In those instances, I know, I'll speak with my personal experiences. The families have made in advance arrangements with me as an educator saying, okay, we're going to be gone for a week. What is the classroom work? And yes, we want to keep the continuity of learning, but at the same time, again, with the messaging, we did have learning going on during the pandemic. And so that's what the push-pull is that we're having as a society, even with workforce. You know, does the workforce need to be in an office 5 days a week, or can they work from somewhere else? As a society, we are struggling with that, and I wish I had the answer for you, but I think by working together, we can find that balance that will work for all of us to make sure we're creating a society with proficient students that can go into the workforce or into the military or onto higher ed, whichever they choose, that they can be a successful citizen, can join in Nevada's economy, and move us all forward.
Assemblymember Flanagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Point of clarification for me, just to make sure I do understand it. So the personalized competency-based learning, is that strictly for at-risk students, or is that all students? I have a two-part question.
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, we actually have 6 of our school districts that are working together as entire school districts for personalized competency-based learning. It is not just for students that are at risk or special education students. It is for students that have all abilities.
Okay, thank you for that point of clarification. So in that space, I'm wondering, as you guys work to create these better models, is there anything in place that correlates the use of technology, because our kids are so technology driven now, but this space of managing their social skills and their learning ability, the correlation of their lack of performance tied to their overuse of technology, so thus they're not performing well because they're already moving away from the social skills? Because the things you list are the things that really technically I grew up with as a student. So this portrait of a learner is the same portrait of a learner that existed technically when I was a kid learning, and we were those students. But now our kids are facing different challenges, and I'm wondering, how are we monitoring the effects of the modernized world on their learning abilities?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, thank you. A lot of people want to go into education and say, but when I was in school, and the fact of the matter is, none of us have experienced the learning environments that our children are experiencing today. So thank you for that recognition. Appropriate use of technology. We have quite a few school districts that have made the determination that students may not have cell phones in classrooms. They put them in pouches. They're not allowed to, actually, and you have some educators on this committee that I'm sure could enlighten in that way. I myself, as a educator, it's the appropriate use of technology. Technology can be a great equalizer at times. A student that doesn't have the fine motor skills to be able to write out sentences, they need to go to OTPT to be able to just handwrite. But if they're able to record their thoughts and get it to the educator, they're demonstrating their skill set instead of having to write a paper, but they're able to share what they know. And so making sure that we differentiate when it is appropriate to use technology and when it is not. It has been a distraction in our schools, and there is data and reports that are already coming out that school districts and classrooms where cell phones are put away, the students are more engaged in their learning, paying attention, having conversations with other students in the classroom at the same time. So there is data with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the presentation. We really do appreciate having you here, and I know this won't be the last time. I know that Vice Chair De Silva has additional questions and would love to meet with you after. I am just concerned about the time because it is 3:20. So I am going to go ahead and move us on. But Vice Chair De Silva would love to meet with you guys after if you guys can help go to his office to schedule that. Thank you. At this point, we are going to go to our last presentation of the day with the Nevada Association of School Superintendents. We really do appreciate you for being here and for waiting. You all are last on our agenda. So with us today, we have, I think, several superintendents from different districts, but I wanted to give a shout out to my father-in-law, Superintendent Fawcett, who's with us today too. I didn't realize that I would be walking into the committee room and seeing him today. So thank you for joining us. I've had all my family in assembly education this week. It's been great. Please feel free to begin when you're ready.
Members of the committee, thank you for having us today. Superintendent Adam Young, White Pine County School District, and I'm joined by AJ Fueling over here, Superintendent of Carson City, Tate Ells, Superintendent of Eureka, and Joe Ernst, Superintendent of Washoe. And I also want to acknowledge, while honoring your most studious committee designation, which I'm assuming is self-imposed. I don't know if there was a contest to come up with that, but congratulations on that designation.
I used to be chair of the hardest working committee in the legislature. We're not the hardest working because this isn't government affairs, but it is the most studious and most scholarly. So welcome.
Well, in the back row here, and notice it is the back row, we have our most studious superintendents joining us as educational leaders across the state. And we have a few who weren't able to make it today as well, but just want to acknowledge their presence. And again, thank you, Chair Torres Fawcett, Vice Chair De Silva, and everybody else for the opportunity to be here today. We know that you've had a long slate of presentations today, so I'm starting my timer right now, and we will do our best to adhere to time. We want to thank you for everything that you do. This is what we believe about public education. It does change lives. Every person who's sitting in this room right now can think of a teacher or an educator, a counselor, a principal, maybe even a superintendent who touched their life in a way that affected the trajectory of learning and of human development. And we believe that with all of our hearts. We know that you do too. We do believe that we need to work together if we want to transform public education for the positive. And we just honor everyone's spirits. Students show up every day for the most part really ready and willing to engage, and our educators are the best in the country. Some tiny history on INVEST. This began in 2003. And Dr. Mary Przinski always reminds us that full-day kindergarten was one of INVEST's first priorities way back. We were talking 22, 23 years ago. And it took 10 years for full-day kindergarten to become a thing in Nevada. So while some of the things that we may talk about with you today might be aspirational or perhaps a few years down the road, we believe in the collective power to make some of these things happen. So with that, I'm going to toss this to Superintendent Ells.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent Young. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Tate Ells. I'm the superintendent of Eureka County School District. And there are many parts of our presentations that overlap today with the other two presentations. So to piggyback off of Assemblymember Flanagan's comment, our students are different now than we had in the past, and our needs are different for students. And mental health concerns and social emotional abilities are plaguing our schools in many cases. And although we've made great gains, that's an initiative and a goal that we want to keep working towards. It's something we have to do for our students. So I'm going to pass it over to Superintendent Fueling now.
Sorry. Andrew Fueling, Superintendent for the Carson City School District, otherwise known as AJ, and Carson City School District, otherwise known as the CCSD. So a little bit of items tied to money. So first, facilities. We know that there's many studies that speak to how the importance of good school facilities, great learning environments, really do lead to improved outcomes. And so here are some examples. You'll see of some great facilities for kids to engage in learning. However, there are significant needs. And so I'll point out in the lower right-hand corner there, a picture from White Pine County. That's a wheelchair ramp. And in most other places, we'd call that a set of stairs. So you have a situation with buildings that cannot have elevators put in, but they have to figure these things out for kids to be able to get around to school. So there are some difficulties out there that we are still dealing with. So the first, or the priority related to this, is designing environments that are safe and secure and student-centered, that can accommodate all of our students, and ensure that we have funds to not only build facilities to meet those needs, but also continue to operate and provide maintenance in our existing facilities. This is something in the Commission on School Funding report. One of the recommendations that they have is to really look at this ability to raise enough funds to provide the school learning environments that our kids deserve. This is a slide taken from the Gwynn Center, and just to give you a sense of what funding looks like across the country. I know really this presentation in some ways, I could have said, well, Guy Hobbs just said all this. But just going through to give a sense of, you saw what the average is across the country for per pupil funding. This gives you a sense of state by state where the funding differences are and what they look like. This slide is a graph, and it's a little strange, but I'll explain. So when you're looking at the state's appropriation from the general fund over time to K-12 education. And so it starts with 1970, which is the earliest data that I can find. And at that point, 46.1% of the state's general fund budget went to K-12 education. Over time, you see that decline, and the gray line is currently Health and Human Services. So you see, as you get to 2022, 23, there's been a crossover there. And so the hope is that with what I think was the legislative intent of SB 543 and having increased revenues, that amount of increased revenue is matched in terms of the transfer from the state's general fund to the state education fund, that it matches that percentage, and hopefully we'll turn that back up. You may have heard of something called SB 231 from the last session. We have a lot of people who are very, very happy about SB 231. They actually, some of them just got out of school. They may be coming here to give you a hug a little bit later, for some of my Carson folks. But every district distributed those funds, continues to distribute those funds. There are concerns going into this session, and what I believe is, we believe is an intent to continue or make permanent some of those funds. The methodology of how those funds get distributed could be problematic for some districts, so just something to consider. Last time there had to be a matching portion from districts. That could be very problematic going into the next years. And then how it works within the PCFP model itself, if it does end up being placed into it. So this leading up to then the third priority, ensuring optimal funding for all of our students in Nevada. Again, we are in absolute lockstep with the Commission on School Funding. So any recommendation you see there is something that we would certainly recommend. And I think the reality, and as Mr. Hobbs pointed out, there is no way around a change in tax policy to make this happen. So it will take will and a bill to make that happen. Fully funding the PCF weights, continue to fully fund them, and as hopefully we move towards optimal funding, continuing that level of weighting to match what the recommendations are, and then to fully to fund the weights for each student on all of the weighted categories that they qualify for. And I think just to be clear, when we talk about a student that is an English learner, because we talk about weighted funds, and we know there's an English learner weight, and there's just an assumption that, there must be funds that a district is receiving to provide services to the student. And that is not the case. If you have a student that is an English learner, but also qualifies for some kind of special education service, there is no funding following that student. there's services being provided, and those services cost. We have to service our kids, but because of the way that flows right now, whatever the highest category is, you only receive funding for that highest category. So we are certainly thankful for all of the funding increase in the past session, but just to also keep in mind that for 30 years, funding was, the increases in funding were at a very low level for 30 years. And so that 1 year bump is amazing, and again, very grateful for that, but it is going to take time to see the impact of that for our kids.
Thanks, AJ. So our next priority centers around some of what you heard Superintendent Ebert talk about with the idea of the Nevada Portrait of a Learner, the concept of innovation in Nevada schools, so that the types of educational experiences that we provide for our students are the ones that prepare them for a future that can't necessarily be predicted at this point in time. So as superintendents and as school districts, we have engaged in some really, really deep, powerful learning about what those types of learning experience need to consist of, and what some of those outcomes are, and how those outcomes are perhaps a little bit different than the ones that we measure and report on in the accountability framework that you have all talked about quite a bit in the previous presentation. So there's a little bit of a mismatch right there, as this new North Star that is very innovative points us in a great direction that we want our students to participate in, and yet the performance framework kind of gets in the way maybe of innovating. And so what our next ask is in our Invest platform is that you as legislators continue to join that cause, as a number of you were on the Commission on Innovation, and enable, free up your educators, free up your school districts, free up the people who are working closest to kids to be able to have this space to innovate without kind of a fear of what happens if I fall short of that. And while Superintendent Ebert did a great job of saying that the point of those things is not to instill fear and it's not to show blame, we have to acknowledge that whether or not that's the intent, sometimes that's how it feels. And so what can be done to change some of those policies to get educators to not kind of, Assemblymember Flanagan, like you said before, we've all as students developed some of these skills. What I see as the difference in this innovative model is that this is the purpose of the system versus just kind of a byproduct of the system. And these academic priorities, which of course are still priority, those are in service of these different types of outcomes, because these are transferable in English, math, social studies, science, all of these other types of domains, and there's synergy that's created when they work together. This is what our employers telling us that they want to have. So thinking about learner-centered and future-ready, there are some shifts that need to happen. Some of these shifts are already occurring. Just to highlight very, very quickly what some of those are, there's some incredible work going on in every school district in this state. I would say every school in this state. The challenge is, how do we scale that up so that it's happening uniformly as opposed to maybe pockets of excellence here and there? And then how do we align our measurement system so that it shows you and shows the public the incredible progress that's being made? So this is priority number 4. We refer you back to these Commission on Innovation and Excellence recommendations. We know that you'll have a bill for that later and probably have lots and lots of discussion about that. This is a great roadmap for you as policymakers to consider as we move our education system forward.
Thank you, Superintendent Young. My name is Joe Ernst, Washoe County School District Superintendent. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you very much for having us today. I will go through my slides quick because some of them you've seen already. This slide just illustrates progress that's being made in Nevada relative to proficiency while having room to still grow. On the next slide, this one is some of the most recent data that we have. I think it's a good data set. It's the National Assessment of Educational Proficiency, one of the few national assessments that really looks apples to apples. And what you can see here in 4th and 8th grade is you can see Nevada's scores relative to the U.S. average. And when you look at that, I think that there are some signals and encouragement for some academic progress that's being made. There's still a lot to learn from this assessment. Nationally, it's being dug into very deeply, particularly around middle school mathematics instruction. When you go to the next slide, there's been conversation about disproportionality academics, and this is certainly a challenge and charge that we have as educators. And while there's plenty of room to grow, again, when we looking at return on investment and looking at some of the additional funding that has been coming in over the past year, you're trying to find signals that show, is progress being made? You look into this area and you can see some of the progress that's made relative to some of our different students that we serve. And so I think that too is an encouraging sign. The last slide, the next slide is around chronic absenteeism. There's been that discussion today, reasons behind it, and I think a lot of us have plenty of explanations for that, and certainly it is in the neighborhood of 25%. But what you see there is you see schools and Nevada as a whole, as was pointed out in the earlier presentation, making some pretty significant cuts and decreases in chronic absenteeism. A point of clarification that I think is always worth noting is average daily attendance and chronic absenteeism are two different things. Average daily attendance, the number of students that are attending on a daily basis, is really typically around 92 to 93% across the state. So it is worth just distinguishing those two pieces of data as we look to use the entirety of the data to help drive thinking and decisions. The last one is really related to the efforts that are occurring relative to advanced diplomas, dual credits, CTE programming, and really recognizing as an education system how the work that's being done in our schools directly contributes to the economy and to the whole of Nevada. And one of the things that we're seeing some pretty innovative space on is the expansion of dual credits. CTE academies are really growing across the state at really strong rates. And the other thing that we're also looking at is making sure that we're meeting the needs of all students. And so we're also looking at internships. As a school district, we've been able to provide over 100 different internships this school year, as opposed to only 20 the prior school year. So you're really trying to get at the various level of data as we're looking at workforce development.
Thank you. As we conclude, Chair, we would like to just point the committee that we have provided to your staff, and these are linked in the slides as well, some highlights from every single district in the state. We would encourage you to really dig into those. As mentioned before, our current metrics, and there's no blame assigned to this either. They measure what they were designed to measure. If we dig a little bit deeper, we have an opportunity to learn a lot more about what is going on in school districts and to celebrate some of the progress that's being made. So I'd just like to invite you to review those handouts which we provided for you, as well as the CIE recommendations, the CSF recommendations, and all that. We wanted to end with a tiny bit of humor. I find this to be funny. Hopefully it doesn't offend any of you. But I do want to tell you that this is real. This is real. We need to be aware of this. And just, we want to celebrate. These are things that don't show up unless you have a student who's in school, and as you all think about what it was like to be a student. I was a musician in high school. I could have cared less about the ACT. What mattered to me was my all-state high choir experience. That's it. My senior year, I spent jazz band, and choir. and I tolerated English in government, you know, and that was the experience that I needed. And we want to be able to provide that and differentiate in this personalized model that we're envisioning for the future. So we appreciate you. As this accountability model begins to align with this future forward student-centered system, then we think that we'll see even more progress, and we can't wait to share with you what that is and invite you to ask any questions that you might have. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And to be clear, my understanding is NASA represents all the superintendents in the state. Is that correct?
Adam Young for the record, and that is correct, as well as the State Charter Authority.
Thank you. And so can you talk a little bit about how, I guess the differences in size? I think the majority of lawmakers here are from either Washoe or Clark. So can you talk about some of the differences in size? I mean, I know we had the opportunity to meet in the winter, and you mentioned that you still teach classes, right? You brought up choir, and I remember you mentioning that you're still teaching. So if you could talk about the differences in size and the challenges that might come for other districts outside of Washoe and Clark.
Adam Young for the record. Thank you, Chair, for that question. So I like to say that White Pine County School District is the 10th largest school district in Nevada. We have about 1,250 students, but we also have represented back here, as you pointed out, Chair, Superintendent Fawcett, who is the superintendent of Esmeralda County student. And Jim shared with us in our meeting this morning that his enrollment right now is 90 students in Esmeralda. And of course, we know in Clark County, we have 300,000 plus or minus a few thousand in there given the day. And Washoe, 60, and the State Charter Authority is around 60. And then we have a big drop off down to Lyon County, Elko County as those kind of mid-sized school districts on down to the 10th. And then smaller from there with Lander, Lincoln, Eureka, and others.
Thank you. And I know I have a couple other questions from members. I'll go to Assembly Member LaRue Hatch.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for bearing with us for our very, very long day. My question is just about funding, which I think we all care about tremendously. I think we already talked about some pretty astounding numbers from our first presentation today, and you have some important recommendations. My question is, how have those recommendations been adapted to and implemented in the governor's budget, if at all?
So, thank you, AJ Fueling for the record. So I think in the current budget, so I wasn't able, the graph that shows the difference, say, in the state appropriation from the general fund to K-12 education, that has not been updated with the budget numbers that have been proposed by the governor for this year. Once we have a better sense of those updated numbers, that's something that we could certainly update just to see. I think at this point, I'm not sure we're fully aware of what the changes are in per pupil funding going forward at this point.
Thank you. Chair, may I have a brief follow-up? I know we're running short on time. No, I appreciate that, and I think you are in a similar place to all of us with the governor's budget right now. But my follow-up question is, there have been some very important revenue proposals that have made from the Commission on School Funding, what you're advocating for. Have you seen any of those proposals being implemented by the governor in his budget or in his legislation coming up? Have you been informed of any support on that end?
I guess
I can go. I'm going to go ahead and just step in. I don't know that the superintendents would be able to answer that. Probably be best for the superintendent, Ebert, but I don't know that it necessarily applies to our committee. But I'll work to help get you that information too. I know I sit on the Committee on Ways, and I know that there's been a ton of budget amendments that the governor dropped 2 weeks after he made a proposed budget, which is uncalled for, quite honestly. And so we're still going through those amendments, and so is our staff, and we'll have more information on that. Assemblymember Ortlicker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation and the work you do. Just would like to hear a little bit more of the slide on current core top skills. And I think you did mention they were coming from business industry what they thought rather than necessarily what you thought. Because when I see reading, writing, and mathematics at 16, that seems surprising from educators. So could you put that more in context, how you use this?
Absolutely, Assemblymember. Thank you for the question, Adam Young. So you can see on this slide that the source from this is the World Economic Forum, the Future of Jobs Survey in 2023. And so this is we share this. There were probably 30 or 40 different pieces of information that we could have included here. This is meant to be just an example of the types of discussions that leaders, teachers in the trenches, community members, others are having to kind of guide what do we want this future-ready system to look like. And as Superintendent Eberts outlined in the development of the Nevada Portrait of a Learner, many of the districts who have been involved in that same work locally have had those same types of discussions about what are these durable skills that we want to see, that our community members want to see, that the research base from within the United States and internationally tell us that this is what helps students thrive. When they can do these things really, really well, this is what helps them thrive. And I will tell you that the first reaction that I had when I saw this, which was probably about a year and a half ago, was, how can that be down there at number 16? So your reaction was the same as mine.
Thank you.
Members, any additional questions? Assemblymember Hanson, sorry, I missed it.
Oh, no, that's okay. You're juggling a lot. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, superintendents, for being here. I'm going to brag a little bit. So 5 of my 6 superintendents, they're not mine, but my district is represented here, and I'm just going to do a little shout out. So if Superintendent Holmes, if you'll wave in the back there, new to us for Pershing County by way of Montana and Wyoming. And then we have Superintendent Klein, who's been serving Lander County very well, and Superintendent Anderson in Elko County, who helped us with the WAHI. I greatly appreciate that. And then our new superintendent in Washoe County, I've had an opportunity to get to know a little bit, and so impressed. So glad to have you here. And then ours from Humboldt isn't here, but he's been here many times and has served on the commission on per pupil funding, and that's Superintendent Jensen from Humboldt. So I wanted to just recognize you, give a shout out in the sense that I got to know Superintendent Anderson when I went to tour White Pine School with the senator, and sympathetic to some of the real challenges you're facing with an old building and not a funding base. But what I want to ask you is, a lot of times you come here and you ask us what we can do for you. But I'm going to put you on the spot, and I want you to tell us how we need to stay out of your way in certain circumstances. You know, I think a lot of us have real regard for the independence and the autonomy that our school districts and the way we are set up in the state, you know, and that we want you to be able to do the work you need to do. But I do think, while well-intended, we sometimes pass down things that make your work even harder. So if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, maybe give us some direction. What tends to put you here? Here's the good news: you don't have to run for election. So that's right. So maybe you could give us just some good insight on how we can help you by staying out of the way.
Adam Young, thank you, Assemblymember Hanson, for that question. Well, number one, I want to thank you and recognize that the level of commitment that you all have towards improving education in Nevada is where that all starts. You know, the collaboration, the opportunity to talk, the fact that you text back and forth with me and answer my questions, and many of you do, that is just so helpful. So we do it together. Co-creation is part of this idea of the Portrait of a Learner reform, is that no reform ever works if it's dictated from the top and everybody has to fall in line, because inevitably people don't fall in line. People are human, they're not widgets, they have minds of their own, and sometimes they are very passive aggressive about the way that sometimes they're aggressive about the way that they don't fall in line. But so the more opportunities that we have to do things together, I think would be number one. And I just want to reiterate back to what Mr. Hobbs said in his Commission on School Funding report. You will not find an educator anywhere in our states who says that we need to do more reports to figure out how things stand. Okay, so I would just urge you to be cautious about asking for more of those. Likely, if you want to know something, it probably exists in a report already. And streamlining those and anything you can do for us to consolidate those 500 and something odd reports, as well as, I would say, the alignment issue of the accountability model and trying to make sure that that is future facing versus kind of doubling down on things that might have been prevalent in old reform models that just haven't worked and are part of the frustration. So conversation about how to move that system forward would be my third thing. And I love that question. Hopefully none of that gets me in trouble, and I say that with all humility for you.
Well, I got a bill for you. I'll make sure we reach out. We do have a committee bill that'll be on state reporting, and I know I've worked closely with NDE on it, and will continue to do so. So I think you guys will be excited. At this time, member, do I have any additional questions? I did have one quick question. I just wanted to know, you mentioned dual enrollment and CTE just a little bit, and I'm just wondering if you could talk about some of the challenges facing. I know that we've had a lot of expansion through our programs, and I'm wondering, I'll just be very clear. Like, I know that we've previously had more funding for dual enrollment programs specifically. I'm not sure if we've seen an increase in CTE funding over the years. I haven't been following that as closely, but I know that we previously had funds specifically for dual enrollment. And then since 2020, during the COVID special sessions, those funds have never been restored. So I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to those programs and how that funding has impacted the existence of those programs and how it could be positively used for those programs.
Yeah, Adam Young, and I'll defer to anyone else who wants to chime in on this as well. Thank you, Chair. So the beauty of dual and concurrent enrollment is that it really, I was a high school principal for 13 years, so this is like, I lived this world forever, and it's I'm very passionate about it. It creates so many options for students, especially in rural communities where you have a limitation in the number of staff members that you can have to offer these really robust types of programs. So in White Pine, I mean, we have incredible dual enrollment participation, incredible CTE participation. It is a barrier for students of poverty because in our district, that unless a student requests a scholarship, they're on their own to pay that dual enrollment tuition. And so we have methods in place to allow our students who struggle with that to gain assistance, but it's on our dime. There are no state funds that are available for that I'm aware of, and Superintendent Ebert can correct me if I'm wrong. The state CTE allocation, the state CTE competitive grants, again, my district takes advantage of those very, very, very heavily. Would it be helpful if there were more funds devoted specifically to those programs? Of course it would, because the more funds that are directly devoted to those programs, the more robust they can become. And as was evident in the NDE presentation, and you can see on this slide right here, when students are involved in those types of opportunities, as well as music and theater and other types of co-curriculars, it helps them. That's what reduces chronic absenteeism right there. Not making them take more math classes or more English classes. You want kids to come to school more, let's give them more of those things, and I guarantee that chronic absentee rate will continue to go down.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it looks like we're all done with questions. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tate Else for the record. I just wanted to add on to that I think the size of our state and the diversity of it oftentimes plays into that. So for my district, the amount of funds that we would get, like through grant funding and things like that, is not enough money to make it significant enough for our employees to work on. And so we offer different programs, and I'm not the only district that's in this scenario. So I think sometimes when things are very, very heavily regulated and there's a lot of requirements and commitments to those, it really does negatively impact our students farther down the road. Fortunately, Mr. Statuki, unfortunately, he's gone, but when he was there, he was really good about working with us through all of those things. But for our district, it's really challenging to meet all the requirements of all of the CTE. There's barriers there, I guess, just from a resource standpoint and human resource standpoint.
You dropped a nugget of knowledge. I didn't know that Mr. Tatuki had left.
Sorry.
No problem. So thank you so much. I think Assemblymember Hansen had some closing comments too.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I completely forgot to say thank you to Superintendent Else from Eureka County, because Eureka is in my district now, and so glad to have you here. But not to overlook Superintendent from Mineral County, was a former county, and Superintendent Key, I think I'm saying it right, has done incredible work there. So I hope I not overlooked anybody. Again, appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here today. At this time, we'll go ahead and move on to the final item on our agenda, which is public comment. As a reminder, if you are wishing to testify in public comment, please approach the testimony table in Las Vegas and in Carson City. As a reminder, each person has 2 minutes to provide testimony, and I will time it. Public comment may be limited to the committee, may be submitted up to the committee up to 24 hours after the hearing. As a reminder to committee members, we do have several individuals in the community that have commented in public comment and that have submitted written comments that is available through Nellis. At this time, we'll go ahead and begin here in Carson City. Go ahead and begin, sir, whoever would like to begin.
I'm John Ippolito with Protect Nevada Children. You can find 1,500 of us on Facebook at Protect Nevada Children. Unofficial and official EdTech vendors. Unofficial. 11 years ago, the political left and right started writing about how all the student data collected and student profiles created on children may affect their futures. The highlights from 5 of those articles are on your handout. This nice lady has. The data will be stored forever, and parents will have no access to it. Around the same time, official student databases were being set up. Both the ACLU and the 10th Amendment Center were against these longitudinal student databases being created. In Nevada, the 2 longitudinal student databases are Infinite Campus and SANE. Experts say Infinite Campus is the largest database ever created on U.S. children. The problem data is the medical, discipline, minor discipline, counseling, MTSS, and psychiatric data. Much of this incriminating data is subjective. Most parents never see any of this data and have no idea what's stored forever about their children. The most incriminating data is also stored forever in the NDE's student database called SANE. Infinite Campus and SANE are not healthcare providers, so the data is not protected under HIPAA. We're seeking a bill sponsor to require districts and the NDE to begin deleting IC and SANE data, or at a minimum, to educate parents on how to see all the IC data for their children. In Washoe County, parents can go to protectnevadachildren.org to view all the data Infinite Campus will store forever on their children. Parents who have done this have been very surprised. If you'd consider sponsoring a bill, contact us. My email address is at the bottom of your handout. This nice lady has. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I am Brian Wallace, a current middle school teacher here in Carson City and the CCSD, and the Vice President of the Nevada State Education Association. The Nevada State Education Association has been the voice of Nevada educators for 125 years. With bipartisan support, the legislature created the Commission on School Funding and asked the Commission to develop a plan to reach optimal funding in 10 years. NSCA has closely monitored and actively engaged in the work of this commission. The commission has taken this charge seriously by exercising a professional and methodological approach to their mission. The Commission presented today on how to reach optimal funding, and NSCA calls on you to pass the plan, as remaining in 1981 is not acceptable. The Commission's plan proposes raising revenue with an expanded sales tax base and the closure of the property tax loopholes. The plan calls for $700 increases to per pupil funding in each of the next 2 years, costing just over $600 million. The plan calls for similar increases over the next 4 bienniums. Nevada educators, students, and communities are counting on you to pass the plan. 2 years ago, NSA also came to this table saying it was time for 20. While there were issues with the mechanics of SB 231, progress was made, and we were able to negotiate 20% raises in many of our Nevada districts. To continue the progress on educator retention and recruitment, these funds must be made permanent, and frankly, new funds are going to be needed. Continued progress will require significant political will and discipline to remain focused on the task. Proposals to divert public funds away from public schools, whether that be through new mechanisms to expand private school vouchers or giveaways to Hollywood studios, should be rejected. Every student in Nevada deserves the opportunity to succeed, and that starts with a fully funded education system. This is the moment to break the cycle of chronic underfunding and invest in the future of our public schools by passing the plan. The Commission has done its job by developing the plan that was requested. Now is the time to pass the plan for our students, our communities.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Adler. I am with Silver State Government Relations. I represent a small coalition of independent public charter schools in northern Nevada, but also importantly, I am a high school English teacher. I am offended by rating number 16 of critical skills, and I am the grandmother of 3 young Nevadans. I came early to be a fangirl for Guy Hobbs and the Commission on School Funding, and I sent you all a link to the report. But I am turning around. I am a fangirl of yourselves, of the questions that you asked, the probing issues that you brought up, also of Superintendent Ebert and of the superintendents. I think this is terrific progress. We have talked more about education funding already this session than we did all of last session, in a way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eduardo Martinez with Western Public Affairs on behalf of the Charter School Association of Nevada. I won't keep it very short and brief so we can all get on with our day. But the Charter School Association supports the effort to increase school funding and bring our state up to optimal funding. So if you need our support, we're happy to be of assistance and continue the conversation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else remaining here in Carson City. We'll go ahead and go down to Las Vegas.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I already had. I apologize. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Stephen Horner, Stevenhorner. I am a resident of 88 and Senate District 11. I am a retired special education teacher, and I am still a guest teacher at Clark County School District. I grew up in White Pine County, attending McGill grade, White Pine High School, and UNLV. I am the president of the Nevada State Education Association, retired. By increasing our state funding for public education to at least the national average, will ensure that our students will learn in an environment that will be conducive to better learning, because they will have smaller class sizes and educators will be able to individualize instruction to maximize each student's ability. Optimum funding can also make certain that the students can start each instructional day with a hot meal, and at midday they will have a healthy lunch to cultivate the most advantageous learning possible. The ability to recruit and retain the best possible educators will increase, which will in turn truly help the enriching instruction. Please pass the plan, giving our students the brightest future possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Torres Fawcett and the members of the committee. My name is Jerry North. I'm a resident of Assembly District 12. I've been retired from CCSD since 2008, as a full-time teacher and have been a guest teacher from 2010 to 2020. I'm a member of the Nevada State Education Association Retired and the Clark Retired Education Association. When I started teaching in Nevada in 1980, we were funding education at 91% of the national average. When my students took our yearly exams based on tests devised in Nevada for Nevada, we did well. Most years, all my students scored 80% or better. Even into the 1990s, I could tell when students came from out of state because of their poor performance in my classroom. That was also a time when homeschooling became more widespread. By the time they came to my classroom, they were well behind, and we, the student, their family, and myself, worked very hard to get them up to par with the rest of the students. According to the records, Nevada is now getting only 72% of the national average, putting us at an extreme disadvantage with the rest of the country, ranking 45 out of 50. If we do not continue to add to the per student spending amounts, we will fall further and further behind, cheating our state, families, and businesses of educated citizens with the abilities and skills to improve all aspects of living in the great state of Nevada. Please pass the plan, which is research-based and devised by the Commission on School Funding. Don't let their work be wasted. Nevada needs to add $700 per pupil in each of the next 2 years to catch up to the rest of the nation. Show our children that they matter more than stadiums, actors, and private schools. Our hardworking families depend on you. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not believe I have anybody else in the packed room in Las Vegas that is wishing to testify. BPS, is there anybody on the line? And for those joining us on the line, I'm just going to make sure that I read out the information. To provide public comment or testimony, you can call 888-475-4499. When prompted, provide the meeting ID and enter 831-0554-4137. I know we have a lot of people watching us on YouTube, so please feel free to call in. We'll go ahead and go to our first call.
If you would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to join the queue.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Susan Kaiser. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher with a BS in Biology from UNR.
Ma'am, could you please, ma'am, I apologize. Could you please spell your name for the record?
Yes, SUSANKAISER. I am taught science for 25 years, and I'm a proud member of the NSCAR. I am asking you to listen to educators. I am asking you to pass the plan. As a scientist, I'm going to speak about scientists. They are trained to communicate and share their thinking and results to grow the body of knowledge we call science. A scientist must have an open mind and a willingness to ask hard questions, conduct experiments, and then look closely at their results to infer what may not be directly observable. Sometimes what is believed to be a fact is turned upside down when new technology reveals more evidence. Then science experts revise their thinking and even gracefully accept being wrong. Let's look at an example from history. Galileo is the father of astronomy and also made many important contributions to our scientific understanding. He was an expert. When Galileo's own observations confirmed Copernicus' heliocentric theory of the universe, trouble began. He was accused of heresy by the all-powerful Catholic Church because this theory contradicted the biblical text. Galileo survived the Inquisition but was forced to recant. However, these actions did not change the fact that the Earth orbits the sun. Today's educators are the experts on Nevada's classrooms. Daily, they work with students under difficult circumstances. These professionals have specialized training and conduct their own research. For decades, these educators have sent a clear message via public comment, organized lobbying at the Nevada Legislature, citing data from multiple reliable sources showing the harm caused by critical funding shortages and large class sizes in our school. Although in the last session there was an infusion of funding, it is simply not enough. the Nevada Commission on School Funding, created in
Thank-
2019.
Thank you, ma'am, for your testimony.
Given us the facts.
Thank you, ma'am, for your testimony. Please submit any additional remarks to your committee staff. Thank you. BPS, next caller, please.
If you are just joining us and would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to join the queue.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is Anna Binder, ANNABINDER. I am a mother of 3 successful CCSD graduates with 3 more in the making. I'm here individually, but I am chair of my SOT at my son's elementary school. We just met for the second time to finalize our budget for the 25-26 school year. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but we have a collective bargaining issue going on here. Regardless of where a licensed educator stands, we have to set aside just over $126,000 per educator on our campus. For this next school year, it's costing us the remainder of our carry forward funds, all of our fundings, and we were still $584,000 short. We only lost 19 students on our roll-up, and we had to shred not 1, but 5 licensed educators. We're a Title I, 1-star school, and for the first time, we just met our SPP goals with the implementation of the Tier 1 instruction, and now we're losing 5 educators. The process in which this was done, we were told last night that because we are only advisory, the requests that we made were not followed through with, and we were basically told last night that all of our thoughts and concerns and what we had asked for didn't mean anything. And so the decision to cut the 5 teachers, the teachers were put on notice before the final SOT vote. And I don't believe this is the spirit of NRS 388G or AB 469. But basically, we were told by the staff and our principal that it didn't matter. As a Time for 20 supporter and always wanting optimal funding for education, the CBA issue here in Clark County that is leaving our elementary schools and potentially other schools in the same position must be fixed. I've heard of 1 teacher at one school and up to 10 at others, and I'm being told largely that principals have been very closed off in sharing this information with their school sites. Thank you for your time and all the work that you have ahead in this session, and just wanted to make you aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Chair, there are no additional callers to provide public comment at this time.
All right. Thank you, members of the committee and members of the community that have joined us here in this very long meeting here in education. I know next week we're going to continue to have a number of presentations. And then we will get to our first bill next Thursday. So we'll have that to look forward to. I think our agendas for next week, Tuesday at least, should already be posted. But Thursdays will be released shortly as well. Thank you for joining us. At this time, the Assembly Committee on Education is adjourned.